Welcome to the Probability Podcast. Discussions on emerging and converging technologies, problems that are being solved, and the probability of positive and negative outcomes that we might expect. Now, please welcome your hosts, Jason, the generator Spracklin, and Patrick, the discriminator Lozon.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to some recap of Season 1 of the Probability Podcast. So, Mr. Discriminator, we made it through Season 1.
Yes, 12 episodes, including this one.
We didn't know if we were going to make it even through one episode when we started this journey. But
it seemed like a long time ago, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing once you get something started, this sort of momentum kind of takes over, right? It's like a snowball rolling down a hill and gathering as it moves, type thing, right? It was sort of it started out as an idea, and we just kept pushing it and kept working on it, and I think it got better over time. So then we're getting together today to just kind of recap things and have a little celebration. So cheers to getting through a whole season.
Cheers.
Yeah, it's been a fun ride so far, really. I think more than anything, really just learning a lot, right? Through researching the episodes, I think we've learned from each other, and we get together and talk, right? Everything's not completely pre-planned. So we kind of go through. We have kind of an outline type thing that keeps us on track and gives us sort of talking points if we run out of things to say, which is rare for either one of us to run out of things to say, right? So it's been interesting. I think in some subjects we knew a fair bit about already, and other times we had to do the research and really dig into it. But I would definitely recommend it to anybody who's trying to branch out and learn new things in their field. We started with the idea of generally talking about technology, emerging and converging technologies, and obviously that put AI square in the focus, right?
Yeah, there's so much to talk about with that subject.
Yeah, we covered a lot about AI, and next season we'll sort of branch out into other areas. But given that AI was the big topic in the news and certainly taking over the industry, the technology industry, there's barely an area that hasn't been impacted. By AI overall, right?
Yeah, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, right? We're going to see more and more as time goes on how it's going to continue to affect a lot of the areas of our lives.
Yeah, I think it's like any new technology that comes along, right? Whether it's the internet or the internet itself or social media, any of these technologies that were transformative. Really, they started out really sort of messy, right? Where there was sort of a lot of activity. When the internet first started, you had the what they used to call the .com bubble, right? That eventually burst, where everybody was diving into doing e-commerce and other types of things online, and that was sort of basically what happens is, from my experience, is that any new technology, and AI is the same, right? We're right in the middle of the AI bubble, as it were, right now. Right, where there's a ton of companies getting into it, and every other company that's not specifically building AI, they're integrating AI into their products, and it definitely will. Eventually, once that bubble bursts, then what you'll have is a more mature technology. You'll have better products and that type of thing. But I think right now we're kind of in the Wild West, as it were. Right, you're just seeing this sort of everybody's diving headfirst into the AI pond, as it were. How many of them are going to make it out? I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, think about it, like what we've seen, you and I, right? I mean, I remember when I was a kid, we were watching little tiny black and white TV and those big color console TVs and, the dial-up phone, and now it's, hardly anybody has a landline anymore.
Yeah. Well, it's happened so
crazy.
quickly, right? Over the course of even just over the course of the last 2 or 3 decades, the technology has exploded like exponentially. Believe it or not, I remember when I was a kid, this was before the days of even VHS players. That the only way to see a movie was to go to a movie theater.
Yeah.
And I still remember my father was a school principal, an elementary school principal, and he would take home the projector from school because they had a projector that they'd use to show various types of educational type films. And then he would go to some store and rent a reel to reel movie. And he'd bring home the projector and a small screen from the school, and we would have movie night at home, which kind of blew my mind at the time, right?
Yeah, that's kind of cool. Yeah.
It's the idea. I mean, now we just take for granted that we have home, like I have a home theater here with a projector, and I can watch a movie on a nice big screen. But back in those days, you really had
And surround sound.
Yeah. Even back in the day, you basically had a TV where the speaker was built into the TV. Even the idea of having a sound system was unheard of. So that was to come from there to where we are now with. Even when I think about it, it wasn't really that long ago. I moved into my house, for example, 15 years ago, where anytime we wanted to watch a movie, I was getting in my car and driving to Blockbuster in the neighborhood. And I mean, that was like I said, barely 15 years ago. And now I can watch practically any movie on my phone with Netflix,
Yeah.
And so we went from this sort of rudimentary type technology where we're playing things off discs to now everything being cloud-based and streaming online. And it's just amazing to see that evolution. And I'm wondering what we're going to see next.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, you think about it. I mean, a lot of this is enabled through the through the substructure of the internet itself. And, I remember having a 28 baud modem. I don't know. I could copy the sound, but it would connect and everything would just. Oh yeah, it was horrendous. But now, we're everything's. We're talking hundreds of gigabytes. It's just instantaneous, right?
For sure, yeah.
Let's
see if we can find a 56K modem.
There it is. Yeah. That's great.
So for any of you young people out there, that was what we heard every time we would connect to the internet through those what we call a 56K modem.
Oh yeah, 56. That's fast.
Oh well, that was top of the line back then. With that technology, that sound just kills me. And I remember that I vividly, But there was also a certain amount of excitement about it, right?
Yeah.
About this idea of connecting to the internet and being able to, listen to music and read things and chat with other people. I mean, it was revolutionary at the time.
I was attending a medical conference yesterday, and they were talking about faxes. Faxes.
Oh, God.
The fax technology still alive in government and healthcare.
Yeah. And how, right? You think about it, with all the modern technology we have, and people are still using fax machines. Well, it's funny. A number of years ago, my wife was at the time was a self-employed sort of accountant, / bookkeeper, and she was still very heavily using fax. But we had this fax machine we kept having to buy cartridge refills, and I thought, well, you can set it up so a computer can receive a fax directly. You just need to have this sort of you need to have a basically like a 56K type modem. I don't know if it was 56K, but anyway, long story short, you'd have to have this thing to plug the phone line in, and then it would plug into your computer. So it would basically, and then you would receive faxes directly into the computer. I went over to the computer store, and I'm not even lying. I feel like I paid $60 or $70 for a 56K modem, because it's just technology that nobody's really buying and they're not mass producing. So it was almost like a specialty item,
right?
In which, I mean, back in the day, you'd probably pay what, $5 or $10 maybe for one, right? At a baseline, but that was the only thing I could find, $60 or $70.
But just think about it though. I mean, almost everywhere we look, right? Your kitchen sink, your plumbing, right? Now you can get the touch sensitive, taps and the ones that pull out and you can
Hmm.
wash everything, or even your toilet. I mean, how much technology has gone into a toilet now? I mean, they're now in the water saving mode, and the idea you can have dual buttons, and then you got the built in little spray unit built into the
The
smart
bidet.
toilet seats, the bidet. Yeah, and everything is you know being ultimately being changed, right? It's over time. It's just even some of the things that you think are never going to change have changed.
Yeah,
Well,
for
maybe
sure.
a toaster, maybe a toaster.
Well, yeah, I mean, how much can you really improve a toaster at the end of the
Yeah,
day, right?
yeah,
But yeah, no, I mean, I think what's interesting as well is you kind of see, like I described earlier, like this idea of the snowball rolling down the hill, in that it seems like the pace of progress and technology just seems to get faster and faster, right? If you look at, like we were just went back to like the 80s, but if you go and look at, even the pace of advancements in the last 10 years was probably 10 times that it was from like the 80s to the 90s and the 90s to the 2000s, right? And now with the advent of AI, I could really see things accelerating very fast. Well, I guess we've seen it, right? Like even
yeah,
when we look at what we consider to be this more modern AI era, I guess, right? Of generative AI and neural networks and all these things. I know even like a year or so ago, there wasn't a lot of people talking about it, right?
no,
Like there's a lot of these things kind of existed in some sort of format, but now it's gone like to the point where it's completely mainstream. It's taking over the industry. Everybody's talking about it and everybody's integrating it. And it's really causing this sort of tectonic shift in the industry where everything's moving towards AI. But at the end of the day, AI is really just a umbrella term, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
it's really AI is sort of yes, okay, like at its heart, we're talking about the idea that intelligence can be artificial, but it's a combination of things, right? It's machine learning, right? It's generative AI, or all these different technologies are kind of working together um, ultimately to create something.
yeah.
AI has a marketing problem, though. I think this was my sort of epiphany more
Okay,
recently
all
was
right.
that
Where are you
AI
going with
has
this?
a marketing problem above everything else because there's great technology out there, but everybody just kind of says AI. It's an AI solution, or we've incorporated AI. It doesn't really say anything, and
Yeah,
everybody. I guess I don't know what your take is on this, but I think everybody sort of looks at it and go, "Oh, it has AI," and somehow we've kind of equated it, I think, to magic in a way, right? Like, oh, it has AI, it must be amazing. But really, okay, what does that really mean? What does it really mean that it has AI? Are you using machine learning? Are you using generative AI? Are you doing something else? Like, and what is it? Why do I care that is being that's AI is incorporated into your product, right? It's sort of become this kind of like buzzword,
yeah. It's a
and
buzzword.
but I think there's legitimacy, right? Like this technology is transforming industries, it's transforming software, but it has a marketing problem, I think.
Let's talk about our. Let's we got 11 episodes here that we should just kind of revisit a little bit and talk about.
We started the season by talking about the idea of AGI, right? Um, Superintelligence, as it were. The first episode was entitled "Cyborgs Don't Feel Pain." For anybody that's not, I guess we haven't really advertised this in that way, but every episode of the podcast is based on some sort of quote, typically from like a science fiction movie or a book or something like that, right? So it's if people are wondering why the titles are a little out there sometimes, it's just we kind of tried to find something that tied in the idea because of artificial intelligence and science fiction, and it almost feels like we're living in an age of science fiction now. When you look at all the things coming out in robotics, it's kind of funny when you think about all the things I grew up with in terms of movies, and they portrayed these things that were going to happen in the future. A lot of it's happening now. We still don't have jetpacks, and we're still not driving to work in flying cars yet, but but I'm sure it's coming. If I'm sure that's probably Elon Musk's next foray is to start to build the flying electric car, perhaps. But anyway,
Yeah. We got to master gravity first, but we'll get there.
yeah,
Yeah. So when we think about our first big podcast, other than our intro, the idea was, let's kind of go through and visit it from different angles, right? And when we think about super intelligence, there's so much to draw from at that point. Um, there's a lot of fear out there about what if we ever achieve it, what's going to happen, right?
mm-hmm.
And the idea being that there's definitely some thought leaders out there that believe it's going to be the end of us, right? Plus the fact that there's a lot of thought leaders out there thinking we're never going to get it, and other ones are saying it's going to happen next year, right? So what's really going to happen? Nobody really knows. There's a whole level of basically discovery and work that needs to be achieved in order to get there, and financing to make that happen, right? And who's paying the bucks to continue that that ongoing research and development. And it seems like there's more than a few people out there, more than a few companies out there that are investors that are willing to drop not a few $100s, but billions, right?
Oh yeah, there's a big arms race on right now. I think what's
Yeah,
interesting, like where we kind of landed on the podcast was we said, well, there's probably not going to be this watershed moment where somebody comes out and says we've achieved superintelligence, right? In that it's probably going to be something that incrementally kind of happens over time, and at a certain point, somebody will realize that they sort of achieved some approximation of it. Interestingly enough, they may not even advertise it or announce it, right? Because when they do achieve that, it's going to be a huge competitive advantage. You think about most of the AI now, which is, very, it's based on, language models and, feeding in data and all that type of thing. And it's still very sort of decision based. And I mean, it's very advanced, but whoever creates this AGI is probably going to leapfrog every other company out there in terms of like what they can do with that. But I saw a quote the other day, or I was reading an article. I was reading an article the other day that where they said that if we reach the point to where that some system or some whatever entity becomes sentient, that it will probably hide that from us.
yeah.
So I
No,
thought
no. I mean,
was
I've written
interesting, right? Like
yeah,
the AI will probably not want to let on that it's become conscious
yeah,
potentially, because then there might be some concern. Oh, no, what do we do, right? If it seems like it's potentially dangerous, we might want to shut it down. That was if you ever saw the movie based on the video games Resident Evil, but that was the storyline in that is that they realized this sort of sentient AI was out of control, and they wanted to shut it down. And this thing did everything possible to prevent them from shutting it down.
yeah. No, I mean that was it's been around in science fiction forever. I wrote a little story in my blog just recently about AI. If I were an AI, and the reality is more closer to the truth than not, right? In that particular case.
Yeah.
Now, there's no metric anyway. I mean, we can't even use a Turing test. There's just nothing there to establish, oh, yeah, this is a sentient entity, right? Especially if it's wise enough to be, withholding, right? So not only are we not going to know the fact that, a particular entity has achieved that, a particular system, we'll say, that particular system will have its own means for communication and methods for its communication that it will determine when it's going to unveil itself. The idea is, of course, has it already sorted out, and it will think, in a split second, what multiple thousands of minds would think in that split second, right? So the idea would be, how much has it realized, and what's its next step? And this is the main thing, right? Is the fear of AGI is it is not like us, right? It is beyond us,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I guess that's the whole idea behind that, behind that episode was, it's we're introducing an alien presence, right? Alien to us, and we're expecting it to act like us. We're expecting it to empathize like us, to be compassionate like us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not valid, right? And that's
Yeah.
where we're going to be, right? And no matter what organization, whether they be in the dark corners of espionage and government, dark government, and all that kind of thing. Uh, no matter where they're coming from, um, and actually evolve and become, we're in trouble based on the fact that we cannot assess and understand
Mm-hmm.
what it's like. It's a black box to us. Yeah. So that's the real challenge, and I think we're just going to keep pushing to it. We're just going to keep moving. There's
Yeah.
nothing stopping us. It's the ultimate, right? I remember you and I talking David Suzuki's famous quote about being in the car running toward a cliff at 100 miles an hour. Everybody's arguing who's going to take, who gets the steering wheel, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't really make sense what we're doing.
No, I
Yeah.
think some of that is just pure curiosity, right? Like how do we get any inventions over time? People they're trying to see, can we do this really?
Yeah.
It's sometimes there's not a thought around does it actually make sense, right? It's like, can we achieve this, rather than thinking about the outcome. That was the quote from Jurassic Park that I think came up in the episode as well, or at least one of our episodes, where we were so busy trying to figure out if we could do it, we didn't stop to think about whether we should do it.
Yeah.
And we all know how Jurassic Park ended.
That's
with
right.
all the humans getting eaten by the dinosaurs. So
Yeah.
it didn't end so well for those guys. But it's interesting because it is sort of the same type of thing, that we're very excited to sort of get there. And what's going to happen when we get there? Is it going to end up like the Matrix, where the machines take over and we're all forced into underground cities? Or will it become this technology that propels us into the next age? Because, for all the fear around it, we've certainly we've covered a lot of things where there's a huge amount of benefit. And I think the biggest, theme that emerged through all 11 episodes, I think, was around balance, right? And how do we balance out the vast potential with this sort of, with the idea that there's a lot of caveats, there's a lot of dangers, there's a lot of concerns, and that the only way for it to be successful is to find that balance. But back to the superintelligence piece, I think the other thing we talked about in that episode was, if you're going to create a superintelligence, then what you're doing is it's still artificial, and you're trying to figure out, well, what does it mean to be human, right? That's kind of the crux of it, is that, human emotion and these things they're not always logical, right? It's not based on math, right? You can make decisions based on your head and and like I said, logic, or you can make decisions based on your heart. And there's a quotient there that is not rational oftentimes, that is not logical. So I'll be curious to see how. I know there's people working on it. How are they going to bring that into the fold? Because human emotion is not always logical, and anything that's technology based is put together with some sort of logic and programming. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
What is compassion, right? What is love?
Mm-hmm.
If you think about all the good parts of humanity, it bridges beyond just logic, right? So that experience, that quantifying of our essence, being able to perform, these actions and respond to each other, that whole essence there is what's missing in the artificial world, right? At this point, right? There's lots of talk about, we can just mimic that, right? in the AI. But is it embedded? No, right? And that's where the challenge is. I think when we get into understanding, creatures that are around us, whether it be a whale or a dolphin or other, mammals and reptiles. We're very, scientific about it. We do look at things from a point of view of certain animals have feelings, they can empathize, so on, right? Other ones don't, right? But we also can tie that to those animals. There's a connection there. There's a connection with everything out there, right? Whether it be an ant in an anthill or what, right? And now
some people talk to their plants, right?
Yeah, and now we have this AI, and a lot of people can't even relate to the fact. So what, right? So what? Some box out there, hidden in some server room, gets smart. Big deal. But the reality is that we have so many software systems now embedded throughout the whole network, affecting our homes, affecting our critical life support systems like utilities, right? And power. And if we have a smart home, we've got our transportation, and that's only going to continue to grow. So if we think about AI not being able to affect us, that's a fallacy.
But yeah, like you said, technology is really very much embedded in so many aspects of our lives. So we're going to see a lot of changes come down the pipeline very quickly. Well, we're already seeing it, but I think we're going to see like so much more. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether they're going to strike that balance, right? Because like we talked about, there's sort of we've already gone into issues like bias and discrimination and different things that are inherent in some of these systems and hallucinations and those types of things. And it's kind of the Wild West right now. So I think if they do achieve that superintelligence, it's who knows what's going to happen, like you said, because all of a sudden if it's able to, through the internet connect to just about everything on the planet, and it sort of decides that that somehow we're in its way, right? We're sort of in between it and its goal. Will we end up in that Terminator situation, or are we going to end up, in a much better place? I don't know if we really came to a consensus in that episode, but we certainly had a good discussion.
I think it was a dire warning. I think where we ended with that one.
Yeah,
right?
Maybe
it's a dire warning. Yeah. Now we moved also in episode 2. We jumped into language translation, right? The devil in the dark. That was basically the challenge in Star Trek, whether you're talking, the miners were unable to relate to the Horta. And and the Horta was these funny little creatures that, basically were able to just go through solid rock like it was air, right? And they were, in the end, they built this symbiotic relationship. They were helping each other, right? The miners were a lot safer because they didn't have to do all that digging. At the same time, they had access to all the resources that they were mining for. So incredibly, if you think about it, it was an incredible story about communication and the importance of communication. And we have so many different languages on this planet, and that is a barrier. And then when we think about where we're going with that, with AI and how it can help us, I think our ability, and especially our tools, like tools of today, right? We get on, a phone call, it doesn't automatically translate for us, right? But when we get on these webinars now and these team chats and things like that, you're going to see that. It's going to be an option where you're going to have the auto translation, right? And that kind of thing is going to open up, new worlds. We're going to be able to talk to people we've never talked to before, and not people who may not know your language. You can communicate openly with. That's a huge thing, right?
Yeah, we're already seeing that now with, I mean, we were not that long ago, we were talking about the idea of, real-time translation and how AI might be able to facilitate that. And, just a couple of months later, I'm seeing some things emerge where this real-time translation earpiece type devices are already starting to come out with a high degree of accuracy and so on. And, when you have cultures and countries that have completely different languages, there's really not much communication going on other than the people in each of the cultures that can, go and learn another language and travel to a country and speak. So that this could really sort of open things up in a really interesting, possibly scary way. Who knows? At the end of the day, right? Because now we're starting to bridge, between cultures and countries and that type of thing, which I think ultimately is definitely a good thing. We're recently watching this show, Sunny, on Apple TV Plus, and that the entire show had basically these English speaking people over in Japan, and they had these earpieces that they would just pop in and they could have conversations, and each in their own language. And it was kind of interesting because you'd see where there was a barrier, and then they popped in the piece, and then they were able to communicate. So I think that's the technology we're going to see come out fairly quickly for sure.
Yeah. So the idea of, dropping these barriers and enhancing communication across the globe, you know, that could open up, the world to being more, instead of us versus them, it's us,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's a lot less them, right? And that's not a bad thing in a lot of ways, to be able to have that, sense of society across the planet, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and languages were always that barrier in a lot of ways. And once you eliminate a barrier and bring people a little bit closer together, they start seeing, well, geez, I'm a lot like you, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're a lot like me. Right? We share a lot of commonality, and that is a good thing. It can draw us together, and it can certainly help stave off. If you think about how our wars started, it is the us versus them, right? The whole propagation of hate, right?
Yeah, sometimes
And
simple miscommunications, right?
yeah,
The other theme that emerged in that particular episode was around that not all communication is verbal.
yeah,
And so, like, yes, you can have this real time translation, it'll give you the words, but what we really need is sort of a convergence of technologies to understand the nonverbal cues and how they tie into the situation. Like you said, intent as well. Sometimes someone's tone can imply intent, right? Because the same words, we see that this, if you look at the English language, that this, you can take a single word and you can say it in a very friendly tone, in an excited tone, in an angry tone, in a sad tone. It's the same word, it takes on a totally different connotation based on all these other nonverbal aspects of it, right?
yeah,
And I think that's where AI can really start to help, right? Because real time translation is, I mean, that's something they've been working on to varying degrees of success. But I think this is where AI can accelerate it, especially now that you can have multimodal inputs into AI now, right? It can look at pictures, it can look at video in real time. Um, I even saw something the other day where somebody was showing a 3D model that was, reacting in real time and mimicking someone's face as they were moving their face. The model was moving, so the speed of processing allows everything to happen in real time. So I think that's where you could see some
yeah,
real advancements
yeah,
there for sure. Yeah.
yeah. And the other thing too, it's not what you say; it's what you do in the end, right?
Well, that too.
And
Yeah.
you could be saying something and be projected a very negative. I'm saying a very positive thing, but be projected a very negative, behavior around it. So those are all the challenges around communication. Now, when we move into the next one, was cybersecurity. That's one of my fun areas. I like cybersecurity.
Insecure at any cost
Yeah,
was that episode.
that's right. That was a
Patrick
great
came
one.
up with that one.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about. Well, we talked about a lot of problems around what AI's what doors it's opening on the security side. And those doors are ours.
Oh yeah.
Opening our doors, not a good thing. We had a lock on them. The lock doesn't work, So there's definitely a challenge there. Moving into the future, sure, we're going to have companies are going to be able to buy, more expensive security systems that have AI on them. Well, AI fighting AI, blah, blah, blah. That's just great. But what's going to happen to the average Joe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to be left in the middle. He's going to be the one that's, basically exposed, to these AI, attack tools. And it's not going to be pretty. And I do think, and I do hope that we're going to see more companies in the future, basically take, the homeowner under their wing here and start thinking about, let's protect the homeowner. Let's protect the person renting, the average person, that doesn't know a lot about technology.
Mm-hmm.
And let's give them a level of assurance and a level of tools to protect them against, all these different, methods of stealing, basically conning and stealing, their savings, basically
Yeah, because
identity.
it's not just the. I mean, yes, there's the cybersecurity angle of things, right? Where companies can use technology now, AI, to help protect their systems, right, from attacks, from intruders, from people hacking in. I think um, the real fear is around this sort of social engineering aspect, like you talked about, right? So in this era of deep fakes, where
Yeah.
people can emulate somebody else, you could have set up something that looks like a video call with somebody where you think you're talking to somebody, and then they're sort of, like you said, scamming them out of their life savings, for example, or even on a voice level. We've already seen how voices can be emulated by AI, and where things you can hear recordings of things that by people that they've never said, type thing. So I think even the platform we're using for this podcast allows me it'll analyze my voice, and I can type in something and it'll say it like in my voice, which I haven't tried yet, actually. But
You should try that out. Yeah.
I'm a little afraid to try it, I think. But think about how that could be utilized. So I think when
Yeah.
it comes to the cybersecurity part of it, there's huge concerns, but I think even more so in this idea of deep fakes. And then, think about when they start using these social engineering techniques with advanced AI to get at people that have real access to things, right?
Yeah.
To people working in government and politicians and, and what have you, where all of a sudden now they've infiltrated an organization through a single person. And I think that's much easier than the cybersecurity hack, right? It's the ability to
Yeah.
go and kind of dupe somebody. I mean, we've all got those emails at work that look like they're coming from our boss. They're like, "Oh, can you do me a favor?" And they're asking you to transfer money or do whatever. And usually they're not very convincing, but I think at some point they're going to start to become even more
They will.
convincing, right?
Yeah,
You'll
they
get a
will
phone
be.
call from somebody that you think is someone in finance or whatever, and it's literally someone with running an AI bot on the other side. Right?
Yeah, that's right. There's the level of capability is gone up, exponentially. Yet, luckily, we haven't. The criminal element hasn't totally caught on yet. The and we have a window here, right, to to protect the public, to protect the companies, and we really need to act fast. And I think that's where we kind of left it was, we're living on borrowed time on this one. I think the next one we talked about was when I first got into it, I was like, okay, this is gonna be boring, right? We got into bias, and bias turned out to be a little more interesting than I thought it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we added, the fact that trying to address bias, right? The more you go over into addressing bias, the higher the possibility you're introducing censorship, right? And you're turning, a standard reality into this, colorful fiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where things aren't really that way, right? Um, and we saw that we saw we saw that with Gemini's capability to substitute certain characters on the
From
historical
history.
front, and
Yeah, yeah.
it was quite funny because you know in the end what it was trying to do, but you can't change history.
Mm-hmm.
There was something. History is history. It's already gone. It's already happened. It was what it was, right? Um, and the idea being that you you can change your future, right? That's or you can change your present, but
Mm-hmm.
really looking at how bias, understanding it was more of a challenge than what I think anybody was prepared to deal with at the time, and it still is, right?
Well,
The
yeah, I think
idea of
the AI rewriting history oftentimes when it starts hallucinating and coming up with things. And but talking about bias, we were looking at the other day. We were part of what we do for this podcast is each episode has an image for the cover. We're using generative AI to create these images because it's quick and it's easy, but also it's kind of
it's fun.
ties into the theme because this AI art can really be a little odd sometimes, and it kind of gives us that science fiction type edge to the visual aspect of the podcast. But we noticed that the robots in the art, anytime we generated an art with robots, it always made the robots huge, right? Much bigger than
Yeah,
humans. And I thought that's bias right there, right?
yeah.
That's bias of the AI creating the images and go like, well, we'll make the robot the dominant
We
figure.
are
And
superior.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. We're superior in size and intellect.
Yeah, which is a whole different type of
Yeah,
bias, right?
that's right. Yeah, and so here create an image of a robot. Well, okay, I'm 10 feet. You're 6, and the idea is, oh, I never told you that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's what you get. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the idea of managing bias and data and understanding that. I think the idea around that one was just the whole idea about complexity of that, and then how do you manage that in the future? And I think where we ended up was we really you can never really manage that comprehensively.
Hmm.
The only thing you can do is ensure that you have these AI models, and you have introduce data diversity into them, and do your best, right? And the more different types of models, the more training, the more diverse data you get that you get into them for machine learning, the better they're going to do from a representative point of view, for that whatever that population is, right? Um,
Hmm.
but the idea is that if you have a specific population, of whatever that mix is, whatever those cultures are, and you want to create products for that population, you know, you're going to want the bias and representation of the population. Um, so what I'm saying is, you may have something international, and you bring it to a specific culture, and they'll say, "What is that?" They want to understand, you know,
Hmm.
and that's what we got from a point of view of utilizing AI to help us from a product perspective, right? We really need to build, kind of boundaries around what and who we're talking about, who is the audience, and make sure we also establish the data set around that.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I guess sort of where we landed was also that there needs to be some level of diversity in the people creating these models, but also like testing them. Because I think at the end of the day, you have say like a large language model, you're training it on data, and then somebody has to test that model, right? And ask it a bunch of questions and engage in conversation or brainstorming and kind of see what it outputs. And then at the end of the day, a human is going to be the one that decides, okay, well, this model is doing acceptable things. It also gives it boundaries, right? Sometimes if you ask one of these models to you ask it to do something, sometimes it'll just say, I can't do that because it violates the policy, right? And so that's trying to help stop it from creating things that are hateful or discriminatory. But there's still a human making that decision. So if you don't have some diversity in the people that are running the company and figuring that out, then it could be heavily biased based on the people who are creating it, right? The people that work at OpenAI or building ChatGPT, if there's not enough diversity there or whatnot. Interestingly enough, I just saw that news article where they've a couple of these companies, OpenAI included, have agreed to hand over their models to the U.S. government for safety testing, which is kind of interesting. So, and then who gets to decide at the government whether something's safe or not, right? And we're going to start introducing more biases there. It's going to be we're in interesting times, that's for sure.
Yeah, who's holding the keys on what is
Yeah.
acceptable, right? And that's another side of the whole argument we were talking about is, who's doing the evaluation. So that was an interesting one. We also talked about the environment and sustainability, global warming. Everybody is very well aware. Recently we were talking about plastic particles, microplastics, macroplastics. Super, super, super microplastics in your body, in your water, in their drinks, in your food.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, Never mind pesticides, right? Which are prevalent nowadays in a large portion of our food supply. Um, so we have some serious problems in our environment, and with that, what can AI do to help us there? I mean, we've made so many messes. Can AI help us clean it up?
Yeah, kind of solve things. We discovered, I mean, that was episode 5. It was titled "Everything is Connected" because that's really what we discovered, right? That everything is intertwined and connected in our world through the environment. And now, yes, like certainly AI can help solve some problems, but AI is also starting to create some problems as well, right? The massive amounts of energy needed for these data centers. And I guess they're finding ways to combat that through smaller language models and whatnot, right? But you look at like the main way that they cool these servers is water, right? They're pumping water through these computers to cool them down. Well, now we're using a bunch of water on top of the electricity, so we're using electricity to power the computers, and then we're using water to cool them down. I mean, and the size of these data centers, right? You have everybody from Google to Amazon to Elon Musk running these massive data centers and massive amounts of computing power, which essentially are creating an impact on the environment and sort of, will there be I think that's what we discussed, right? Is there a balance? So by utilizing all this computing power and having this impact on the environment through just running these AI models, are we going to get enough benefit through AI being able to study climate patterns and solve things in terms of agriculture, and will things balance out? I don't know where we quite landed on that. I think we're at a point right now where there isn't balance, but maybe there will be in the future. And you hear a lot of that from people that talk about AI and its impact on the environment. They go, well, yeah, it's having an impact on the environment, but here's the positive impact on the other side. So what do you
Yeah,
think about that?
it's a dynamic conversation because a lot of these giants are looking at these environmental costs as substantial, right? Because managing heat and power are not trivial for these large AI data centers. So AI centric data centers. So the
Mm-hmm.
ideas around what can they do, right, to build better, more efficient processors to reduce power consumption, to reduce heat. Are we going to be able to meet our level of, we use a few watts, over the course of, a year, you know, compared compared to the, multi billions of watts that are being used in these big data centers. It's, not a fair comparison right now. We're a lot more elegant and amazing, I think, in a lot of cases than our our inventions. But that being said, we do believe, that AI contributions to manage our problems in the environment can be substantial, whether it be weather, whether it be managing, emergencies, uh, wildlife, fire, even utilization of the technology to help build better systems, desalination plants, looking at how we can condition our atmosphere, um, building great big, existential models to basically, try to build these, we'll call them multidimensional models of Earth and Earth's climate, and in attempting to, uh, understand the different effects of different components and how we can drive those changes from the bottom up the most efficiently, in the most efficient manner. That all being said, I think there's very positive, message in the end. I think we're going to see a net benefit over net cost here.
Yeah, I think in the longer run, right? It's like any new technology. It's like we said, it's taking a lot of power and water and things to run these data centers, but then they figure that out over time, and they're already running down that path of how do we make these systems more efficient, and the more they make them efficient, the less power they're going to use, the less water is needed to cool them down, and that type of thing. And then the net benefit of, like you said, using AI to keep pushing things forward is massive enough that it probably is worth it. But it's another one of those situations where it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah,
Probably, I don't know.
yeah. And I was resoundingly negative about our next podcast where we talked about humanoids and androids.
Oh yes, episode 6. Do androids dream of electric sheep? That was we got a good laugh out of the cover for that one with the android dreaming of the weird sheep,
That was
as it
Philip
were.
Dick, wasn't it? It was, I think
I think it
so.
was, yeah.
Philip K. Dick. Yeah.
But that was quite a long one because there was a lot to cover in that one,
Oh
but
yeah.
that's certainly an area that we're seeing a huge explosion in right now, right? Of robotics and newer robots coming out that are very elegant in the way they move, and they can. I saw a video the other day of a humanoid picking up an egg, which has always been a big challenge of that, being delicate with picking things up, because in order to do that, that was the biggest problem with robotics for the longest time, is it couldn't do anything with any amount of finesse. So it would try to pick up something, or to build something, it would just break it, right?
Yeah.
Which is,
Yeah. The
so
amount the amount of engineering to make that, to accomplish that, right? I don't think is totally appreciated by the average person.
mhm.
How many different layers are involved to actually achieve that capability of being able, a robot to reach over from a point of view of having all the dexterity controls and guidance systems and just the pure mechanical processes and the sensor feedback to actually grab something so sensitive and pick it up, right? And be able to, reposition that and then put it back down undamaged. It's it, it's mind blowing in a lot of ways of how we talk about convergence of technologies here, right? This is incredible convergence of technologies. We're talking about these androids, these humanoids, and cyber. Where we're talking about having these limbs, attached to humans, right? Um,
Oh
so
yeah.
yeah, so the idea, of course, is we're we are moving light speed here, and we were running robots 30 years ago on production lines, right? But you think about today's capabilities, they go beyond just the standard robot arm of back then, and what we're getting now into is the possibility of mass replacement of human labor and human decision making. You know, and that's one side of the coin, and the other side of the coin is, intelligence workers have always, you know, they've always been safe. Well, that's not true either.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have in the midst now, and I'll just repeat it because I'm doomsayer. Doomsayer. Ultimately, I think we can have a huge impact on our ability to manage an economy. Basically, we're going to
Mm-hmm.
have a large amount of the population will never ever be able to be employed.
Well, for sure, yeah, because it's really at the end of the day, it's to what end, right? That was what we discussed. Is sort of okay,
Yeah,
great. These companies are building these robots. We've just seen videos of them in, car manufacturing and other areas, right, where they're essentially replacing what would have been human jobs. The end goal for a lot of these companies is essentially is economical, right? That they can deploy these robots at a mass scale much cheaper than they can hire, that many humans at a living wage. And certainly, if you're looking at, deploying robots into high risk situations, right, into underground mining and things that maybe, while we do have humans doing them and they are, they do have jobs that they're definitely high risk and people have died, people have gotten trapped underground. Maybe that's a good thing, right, to be able to utilize it for. But what we're seeing is that it's probably going to just take over a lot of areas and sort of like you said, displace people. But it also will, and I remember in the episode I sort of played devil's advocate a little bit as well and said that it's also going to create new types of jobs, right? As the AI creates new technologies and new industries and things, then but the biggest challenge though is that a lot of people aren't going to be trained for that. So there's going to be a portion of the population of essentially get left behind through this massive innovation, right? Of humanoids coming in and sort of taking over things. It's in the short term you're going to see a lot of displacement, but in the future things may end up balancing out.
yeah. We're going to talk about how AI is, replacing people in a lot of different ways, and it's not that they're replacing wholesale, you know, uh, certain positions. It's the slow but steady decline, the boiling of the frog in the hot water situation.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, in the end, we can turn around and say, well, how did this ever happen? Well, it's starting back right now, right? And people need to open their eyes and understand. And there has to be a level of protectionism in order to protect, everyone's way of life, but also protect the rights of humanity. Um, and for myself, I'm all about technology. I'm all about utilizing technology where it should be implemented, right? Um, if we get into a situation where it's out of balance, we'll go back to your balance statement, Jason. Who's winning then, right?
No, for sure. If you look at one of the things I mentioned in that episode was about how I mentioned this Tesla factory Elon Musk has in China. I think it is. It's 95% automated, so very little human involvement, and they're cranking out a fully made Model S or whatever it is like every 30 seconds. So
Yeah.
that's great. Putting things on the market, probably very efficient, very cost efficient. I mean, obviously, they've done the math.
But remember that we're talking about people here, and we need to sit back and think about what we're doing. It's all about critical thinking. Don't let this become a free for all, whatever the market decides,
Well, for
because
sure, yeah.
in the end we'll lose.
Oh, the solution really is education, right? So
Yeah.
if I think inevitably we're going to head down this path of of even more automation through robotics and that type of thing, right? At the end of the day, and I've had a couple of these types of jobs in my lifetime that any sort of repetitive thing on a factory line, most people don't want that job at the end of the day, right? It's boring, it's repetitive, it's sometimes a very difficult job to do. So I mean, on the flip side, just to play devil's advocate, I think it's fine to look at automating these things and bringing in robotics, but if you don't, in the same breath, kind of start educating people to do other types of jobs, right? Then you're in a lose-lose situation. So I think if we can think about, and I guess that comes down to governments, but if we started, let's just say if we had these corporations that are making millions of dollars more profits because they're automating things, then they should really be paying more taxes, and we should take those tax dollars and we should put them into free education, or at least for loans or for subsidies for education, so that people can get prepared for the new economy, because it's coming regardless of whether we want it to or not. It's not slowing down. So I think that's really, to me, the not that it's a silver bullet, but that if we start investing in education, then we're going to see less people displaced because they'll find other avenues, right? We ultimately, these robots are going to have to be maintained. They're going to have to be programmed, and people need to be trained to do that. And so if we start retraining people for other types of jobs, but that doesn't appear to be happening right now. So in the short term, you're going to see possibly a lot of damage done.
Yeah, I'm 100% behind you there. Definitely, that's where the true power lies in education. So, and if you have a 10-year-old at school today, they're going to be affected by this by the time they graduate. Yeah. And if you have a 3-year-old, they could be decimated by this, right? So this is a reality now that people have to be very aware and have to get involved with.
So yeah, let's get into episode 7, which is titled "I'm Evolving Just Like You," which was talking about what we call personal intelligence and AI assistants and companions. That was a fun one, actually. It was purposely. It's funny because earlier on in the podcast we talked about the movie Her. That I had never ever seen, and you had Scarlett Johansson voicing this, sort of operating system, as it were, that the guy in the movie falls in love with, essentially. And right before we recorded the episode, I decided to watch the movie. Finally, I'd, seen it, advertised back in the day, and it won awards, and it just seemed like such a silly concept back in the day that I just never bothered to watch it. But I finally did, and it was actually pretty interesting because it was, I guess, and maybe this was the magic of filmmaking, but it was fairly convincing that you could see how this guy sort of ended up falling for this personality because, I don't think we're quite there yet, although there's a lot of efforts to make these AI entities conversational and have emotion and inflection, and even sometimes people have noted that they have some of these models like even talking in a flirtatious type way or in a complimentary, they'll compliment you, or they'll, all these things. And it's all smoke and mirrors right now. But the premise in the movie is that they've reached the point where AI has reached sentience, and that this guy in the movie he's been divorced and he's lonely, and he gets this new device with this operating system. He starts conversing with it, and it starts to, they start to develop this kind of relationship, which eventually turns into love, which again, as I'm talking about it here right now, seems like a weird concept, but it's executed quite well in the movie, I have to say. But what was most interesting in the movie, and this goes back to our earlier conversation on sentience, is that the AI played by Scarlett starts to actually realize its own sentience through the movie, and that becomes sort of, I won't ruin the movie here for anybody that wants to go watch it, but that sort of becomes this turning point where it starts to realize that it's sentient, and then it starts to develop some sorts of emotion. And at one point they kind of break up because they end up in an argument, and it ends up almost like this real relationship type thing. But there was a lot of interesting commentary on what it means. And I do think that there, one of the things we talked about in the episode was that there are a lot of people looking for companionship, and it's hard, whether that's on a romantic level or just on a friendship level or just purely a companion. If you're an older person in an old age home and that type of thing, that there's a lot of people looking for, and it's oftentimes very hard to find in other humans. So as crazy as this whole discussion ended up being, I do think there's a place for it somewhere. I think that there are people looking for that, and for some people, I think it can fill maybe like a little bit of a void, perhaps, and give them something. But that was more on the companionship side. As a personal assistant side, or on the personal assistant side, there seems we're forging into that full bore, right? There's not a single piece of software that I interact with on any given day that doesn't have some sort of AI sidekick asking me if it wants me to rewrite something or to do whatever, right? It's I think I joked in the episode, it's almost like Clippy. This is back in the days of the
Oh yeah, little
Office
Clippy.
1995 or whatever, with the little paper clip would always pop up and say how can I help you today? And now we're back to Clippy in 2024.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, I think the big thing that also that we pulled out of this was that these are devices with memory, and really, if you have, I mean, it's one thing to discuss something with a device that is like on her, right, where it's more of an external thing. But the other thing is that a lot of these devices may be in the form of humanoid robots in your home and that. And where does that privacy get protected, right? That privacy of information. Where does your privacy get protected with these devices, right? Because they're monitoring it on 24/7, right? So that was one of the big warning signs that we threw out there from a point of view of, yeah, you can definitely get help and support, but just remember, on the other side, there's the backup company, there's the company that does the maintenance and the downloads and so on and so forth. Where's all that memory going, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was definitely an eye opener for us there too. I think the next one was when we just started looking at where our tools were from a point of view of interfacing with AI, and where's our next Google search equivalent going to be. We started into Perplexity, and there's a Andy search and a few other ones. I didn't want to get into specifics, but what can they do better than just the average search does today? The search being plagued by so much noise, right?
Noise and advertising and everything. Yeah,
exactly.
That was episode 8. Episode 8 of the podcast was "The Truth Is Out There," right?
If you can find it.
Yeah, if you can find it. Oh God.
If you can find it.
But it's true, right? That there's now people are using Chat GPT. I mean, they're putting out their own search GPT or whatever. But people are using these for essentially finding answers. There's been this sort of migration of a certain amount of people that are not using Google now. They're using Perplexity or Chat GPT. And what is the validity of the information they're getting back? I think that was why we kind of landed on that. The truth is out there, right? And really what we've encountered is the idea of the answer engine. So the traditional search engine where you put in, you ask a question or you put in a term or whatever it is, and it spits out a bunch of links that you can follow and look at. All that's gone now, where you're just going to ChatGPT, you're asking it a question, it's giving you an answer. And for a lot of people, they're just accepting that verbatim, right?
Yeah,
oh, great.
True.
Thanks for the answer. I'm going to go on with my day. Perplexity gives you all the sources where it got it from, which is great, whether people look at them or not. So it's a little bit of a different experience in that sense. But I think the idea of the answer engine is what's most intriguing to me, right? Where you're asking a question, it's giving you a really nice summarized answer. And in the case of Perplexity, it's giving you that background of where it got the information. And I find it highly useful for
Me too.
I mean, we use it for this podcast, obviously, when we're researching things, but I use it in everyday life right now. I do find it a lot more useful than simply getting a bunch of links for me to go click on and decide whether they're reputable. And then each site is going to give me another little piece of information and I need to pull it all together. Instead, it gives me this nice summarized answer, back to the idea of the answer engine. And I do think that's the direction we're going in. I think we're going to see more and more need for like annotations and qualifiers about where the information came from and whether it's, true or even truth is subjective, right? In today's world, That's kind of the funny part, right? It's like, well, what is truth? We seem to be living in this post-truth era, right, where people live their own truth based on what news network they pay attention to, or which politician they buy into, or right. It's the truth has become more, I guess, like subjective than ever. But it's I think part of what we talked about with bias as well, right? And then
Yeah.
are you getting information that actually has bias built into it? Is it giving you an answer that's sort of swings to one direction or another based on where the model got that information? Because you can see that right now. You can go, if you look at something that's going on in the news, or let's just use the example of the big presidential debate that happened tonight. We try to stay away from politics in this podcast, but when you look at that, like objectively, people are talking about who won. Well, if you look at the news networks that lean towards the left, they're going to say Kamala won, right? If you look at the news networks that lean towards the right, they're going to say Trump won. Objectively, there is no winner or loser really in these things, right? But it's like we're really in that era of like truth is very subjective and it depends on the source. So I think that's where things are going to get really interesting in these answer engines.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the ongoing expansion of these answer engines to help us wade through the chaff and the bullshit and the lies, and the propaganda, and just give us the facts, right? Give us the facts that we can trust with the proper references. And this is, bypass all this noise. And that's where I see the power is in these tools. We talk about complexity, but there's Como and you and Andy and, there's also DuckDuckGo and even Opera. I mean, there's a lot of other, EXA is another one, Yep, Brave.com. I mean, there's a whole bunch of tools. And one of the things that we said at the end was, Google, the big monopoly, good for them. These other ones just will not survive, right? Unless you use them. Unless you use them. Unless you get involved as a user and start using these new tools, they won't survive. And they have merit. So that's one of the things I think we really wanted to push is not just the fact that they're out there, but the fact that, they have a use. And from a, economical point of view, they won't be available forever if everybody ignores them, right? So that being said, I think it was a good conversation. We also jumped into healthcare, and that's near and dear to my heart.
That was episode 9.
Episode 9, yeah.
I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer.
Yeah, and where'd that come from?
Wasn't that the same episode?
Same episode.
Horda that we got the devil in the dark from.
Yeah.
I'm sure that episode title confused the heck out of people though when they saw it. Right, we did this episode on healthcare. It's like I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer.
Yeah, it probably did.
What that was all about, but anyway.
Yeah, and they were talking about the ability to heal the Horta. I think in the end, Bones was healing the Horta with Smith. But that all being said, there is so much potential here in healthcare. It's incredible. And the biggest concern was about trust, right? I mean, it's one thing to say you're wrong, you have a hallucination and, oh, well, I guess that we're not going to use that answer. You can't have that happen. If you're making decisions, life and death decisions on health, on an individual, right? So there's a huge trust barrier, but there's so much that can be supported here with AI. Not only their ability, AI's ability to, really analyze the data in a very granular fashion, but also its ability to span that tremendous volume of knowledge that we have today on the human condition and on health, and the human body, the systems of the human body, and be able to pull all that knowledge together. I mean, if you really think about it, the average, physician today has a tough job. I mean, it's an incredible amount of wealth and knowledge that you have to have available to you to in a lot of cases to diagnose, right? And in order to diagnose it, it is isolate based on symptoms and observations. What they call differential diagnosis is where you drill down and get a final, right? That is, if you think about, normal medicine, it's about what's the average. What do you usually see? What are the usual cases? And that's where you get into, if you are unlucky enough to have something that's an outlier, right? That's not normal. Well, good luck. Good luck getting help. Good luck getting that isolation. You're often going to get misdiagnosis. You're not going to get recognized as the specific problem, and you're not going to get the proper treatments. And this is where AI, can really shine, right? It's an augmentation, sure. Right? And I'm really excited about it. Yeah.
Yeah, AI and other converging technologies, right? AI just seems to supercharge things that are already existing, for example.
Yeah.
Just to, I don't know if you watched the other day, every year around this time, Apple has a huge press conference where they showcase all their new devices and technology and everything. And I thought, well, one of the interesting things that came out, or a couple of interesting things actually, and I think that you're going to see this trend of these devices being able to sort of not necessarily replace a doctor, but like a lot of people don't have a lot of people don't have a family doctor, for example. Right? It's hard to get a family doctor, and then you're going to the hospital for things, but you oftentimes aren't very aware of your own health, right? Unless you get into some of these wearable devices and things. People have, oftentimes by the time they get to a doctor or a hospital, it's too late. But one of the things that came out, like they have the Apple Watch that can monitor things already, but they're coming out where it can now monitor blood oxygen level and those types of things, right? Where it's doing and through AI, being able to do more analysis on what's going on in your sleep patterns and different things. So I think this idea of having this sort of technology that can be an assistant that can help essentially monitor things on a regular basis and let you know where you sit from a health point of view, I think is really interesting. For example, even here in our house, I have a scale, which is basically like a smart scale, that when I get on it, it doesn't only just tell me about my weight, which I'm always horrified to look at, but it gives me my body fat percentage, it gives me my water percentage, right? It gives me all these data points, which shows me a much deeper analysis of where my body sits, right? Because your weight is not just about, you have bone density of all these things, right? But anyway, technology can certainly become that, back to the idea of companion. I think it's really important as well. They also revealed these new Apple AirPods, which can act as a hearing aid, which is kind of interesting. So now you have where for people that have hearing problems, and they can have this set of headphones, and not only they can just listen to things or take phone calls, but acts as a hearing aid. And it can also do a hearing test, which is a new thing. Now, to what degree these things are, effective, I don't know, but I think that AI has accelerated the ability for Apple to provide these devices, which can do anything from monitor blood oxygen level to give you a hearing test on the fly, or to act as a hearing aid.
There's a huge amount of potential, like I said before, and all these different areas of health. Not, also, mental health as well, right? Not just physiological health.
For sure.
Where AI systems can be utilized to help with treatment and process. I mean, you and I we've all sat in that bloody ED emergency room queue for hours and hours and hours, and you go, why? How can we get this? How can we get this better? It's just so. I mean, somebody. We all know that there's at the top, part of it. People want to help. These hospitals want to help you, but there's so many things that are barriers that are getting in the way, and so these we'll call them smarter systems, right? These smarter technology aided systems um, can certainly help with your treatment, right? Can help with your health support and your health response, right? And I do think that they come with the cost. Every time we have these we'll call them the medical industry churning out a new product. There seems to be a extended tab to that. Everything seems to be multiples of zeros behind it. When I gotta wonder why. It's for health. It's for the good of the people, but they seem to get away with this.
We also talked a lot about the idea of like big data analytics, which is, ended up being the episode after that one, but in terms of healthcare, being able to look at large sets of data around medical conditions and possibly even come up with, solutions to medical problems or cures for diseases. And there's already some indication of that, being able to use AI to help crack the code to cure cancer. There was something I saw the other day, which probably we'll cover next season, about nanotechnology, where they create these tiny little robots that can go in and destroy cancer cells from the inside out, which is crazy, right? Because up until now we've had things like chemotherapy and things which are terrible for humans to go through and to try to cure cancer. Now I don't know how most people are going to feel about unleashing an army of nanobots inside their body to kill cancer. But I think for anybody facing something,
they don't have to be nanobots, right?
But for somebody facing a death sentence, I think they'd probably be open to it, right? It's like this guy that got the first neural implant from Elon Musk, right? He's quadriplegic. He's like, you know what? I got nothing to lose. Put this thing in my brain. Let's just see if I can use it. So I think there will be pioneers that are willing to take on these technologies, and then in the future they'll become more commonplace. Next, we had episode 10, which was around big data, entitled "Data is the New Currency." Certainly we went through how big data analytics are being used across like a huge number of industries now, right? And how AI is accelerating all of that.
Yeah, and the idea is that all this data supposedly is aggregated and anonymized and turned into large data sets, and your privacy information is always kept very protected and under wraps. So we'll see what really happens here. But in the end, a lot of companies have spent a lot of money on establishing these, and pulling in all this data from all these different data points, and they're continuing to grab even more data. And with all that data, what do? Right? And do we actually utilize any of it, or do you only utilize a certain portion of it? And of what you do utilize, is it being utilized properly? And with AI, maybe AI is the tool that they really need, the machine learning side of it, to help sort out this massive volume, to help them, from a point of view, decision support and that kind of thing. So, we do think that AI and big data are really, they're hand in hand tools working for the individual corporations to help them make better decisions, and also to drive, better quality product, and they're also understand their clients, their customers better. So in the end, it is what it is. I think that if you consider the tools that are being used for big data today, they're going to be adopted and they're going to be developed to support AI tools are going to support those big data repositories, and it's just it's a natural fit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's huge positivities there in terms of what it can bring. I think where we landed was you still need a human in the loop, which has been a recurring theme as well, that we can't just let AI make these decisions in and of itself, because there's a lot of complexities, right? It can look at the data, it can identify patterns, it can give you insights, but then a human needs to make that decision based on varying factors, not the least of which is, what's good for their company or their organization, but also considering, all those other patterns that we talked about, all those other concerns like data privacy and security and even bias and discrimination. And, we've seen these themes over and over again as we talked
Mhm.
about AI, that it's, at least right now, it's not a perfect system, so that you need to have that human oversight. There's data driven, decision making, but in the end, you need a human to make that decision. And if we just let, AI, if we just ask AI what we should do and then we follow that, who knows what kind of rabbit hole we're going to end up down.
Well, I think there's a Star Trek session or movie about that.
Oh, is
Episode.
it?
Yeah, there's a Star Trek episode about that. I think where they had a computer kind of in charge of a society, right? And then he
Hmm.
ended up destroying the computer, and free will, raged on, right? And never mind the fact that the computer, managed all the environmental systems, stuff like that,
Yeah, no doubt.
right? So that all being said, that's the danger, I guess, of not only giving up your privacy, you're also giving up your thinking, right?
Giving up your
Just
agency,
give
right?
up you, right? Then you have no power at all, right? You become
Yeah, I
irrelevant.
think what the other thing we landed on was the power of being able to interact with AI in natural language. So previously, you would need sort of a data scientist. I guess we're back to displacing jobs at this point, but
Mhm.
previously you'd need a data scientist to present that information back to you. Now you could ask it in a natural way questions, and I guess at a smaller scale, that's what we're doing every day, right? When we're asking ChatGPT
Yeah,
or any of these systems, Gemini, we're asking a question. What is it doing? It's doing an analysis on a whole bunch of data, and it's presenting back kind of a summarized type answer on that data, for
yeah. It
example.
was
So
Kiss. It's Kiss, and in an automated fashion of data, data processing and information technology. It's Kiss. That's
yeah,
what AI
absolutely.
is. So that's what that
Well,
Chat GPT is, right?
interesting you mentioned Kiss, because we talked a bit about Kiss on the episode 11, which was around the creativity, human creativity, and AI. We called it to imitate is to create. And actually, it was personally my favorite episode of the 11. Um, Mainly because we talked a lot about music and what it means for music to be created and performed by humans, as opposed to, we're starting to see those trends in AI getting. I mean, we're seeing AI infiltrate not just music, but all the arts, right? Literature and filmmaking and everything, right? So
Yeah,
it's from the perspective of what it means to be human, and that mostly what we enjoy in the arts, whether it is actually like a painting or it's a song or whatever it is, it's that there's a certain amount of human emotion behind it, right? Nobody's really interested in art without emotion, because that's what people seek when they seek art. They seek to get some sort of emotion from it, or they get some sort of fulfillment from it, right? And if we're not at the point where AI is sentient, how can AI really create art? But we're seeing it already, right? It's creating generative art, visuals, imagery. It is actually creating music, but it's still, back to the title of the episode, to imitate is to create. That's the idea, is that it's still all based on source material. It's not really truly doing anything original. It's doing some approximation of it or some calculation and going, well, I've looked at all this data on all this so-called art that you humans create, and now I've like reconfigured it and spit it out, right? But to varying degrees of success, like we talked about a couple of times here, we use it to create covers for this episode or for this podcast, for each of the episodes in the podcast, to varying degrees of success. And I think we should do a whole post somewhere online about all the outtakes from that, all the interesting
yeah.
outputs that we got when we were trying to create
Oh, it's
images,
fun
and some
stuff.
really
Yeah,
really strange things, right? Like, and interestingly enough, like a lot of like extra arms and limbs, and never seems to get the faces right. And it's
yeah,
sort of I do think over time it's going to get much much better, and I think we've even seen that over the last 6 months. We've seen some of these tools get better, but it's interesting that it still can't quite do what we want it to do in terms of the art. Still comes out a little bit odd. I think one of the tools I use has a fix faces button now built into it. So something's a bit off when you have to build a fix faces button into your software,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
that it always messes up the human face when it tries to recreate it, or adds an extra limb, or what have you, right?
Well, I think what's interesting too with creativity is that, we went around this a bit when we talked about all the different areas, film, music, literature. Um, we do expect to see this a tsunami of noise coming from from the AI augmented people out there that utilize these tools and then post them. And I mean, we just had a news article today where Amazon was getting complaints from people who are, they're getting these AI generated novels getting published, and they're just noise. They don't have
Yeah,
heart. These are not true great stories, And the idea is that just because you can, you do, all about making money, right? Um, so this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to see throughout all the creative arts. You're going to see this, the ability to build something fast, right, and roll it out with ultimately no cost and no effort. And everybody knows when you do something that's really fast with no effort, uh, the true value of it, right?
hmm
It's no longer value, right? It's not held in value, and this is where we get into um, where is AI? What its output? Where does that really lie, right? If it can generate this stuff willy nilly, then what's it really worth, right? And
hmm
that's when we get into the conversations around, just because AI was able to create this Rembrandt or Rembrandt lookalike, is it really going to be worth anything? Well, no, because you can press the go button and it can do it again and again and again with, take the hat off the character and, you know, modify this and modify that. And, you know, just because it can doesn't mean it's the artist, right? And
Oh,
and
for
what that
sure.
artist, we keep going back to the fact that, creativity is about experience. It's about the human experience being, represented in the music, in the literature, in all the forms of art, and all the stories being told in film and that kind of thing. And no matter what, AI can't replace that. AI is just
Yeah,
this.
it's not an equation, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
we talked about that a bit, like when we talked about, you've written some books that there's no specific process, right? It's not a mathematical equation, even though, like we talked about, music is ultimately math, right? You have time signatures and beats per minute and things like these are all sort of mathematical type things, but in the end, you can't really make music through just applying like a mathematical algorithm, for example, because it's about the person, it's about their life experience. It's also about honing a craft over time as well, right? It's like anything. You don't just wake up when you're 8 years old and know how to play a guitar really well, right? You pick it up, you play it every day,
yeah,
you listen to music, you have influences, and it's very iterative. And then over the course of 20 years, you become this amazing player. But it's not. In no way is it really math. That AI couldn't simply take that and just replicate it. I mean, I guess from a purely engineering point of view, perhaps it could, but it's not going to create anything original necessarily that's going to resonate with people's hearts and minds and souls at the end of the day. And that, I mean, I'm speaking in terms of music because I'm very passionate about it, but that applies to filmmaking, to literature, to anything. It's about the human spirit, and back to what we talked about before, making a decision with your head versus your heart. Music is ultimately made from the heart. And can you manufacture music that's a top 40 hit? Sure you can, because there are, generally speaking, notes that sound good together, that melodies that are time tested and that type of thing. But at the end of the day, back to the title of the episode, to imitate is to create. All AI is going to do is just imitate things that it finds. It's until maybe when it reaches sentience, it'll find its own level of creativity, but I'm not sure even then I'm going to want to listen to it, so
yeah.
or intake it. But
Well, the bottom line is that there's going to be, two two main ears, for music. There's going to be the ones, that listen to that AI generated music and say, oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then you're going to have the other crew that are going to be the purists, and they're going to say, sorry, I'm not going to listen to that noise, right? And you're going to see that throughout, all the industries, right? So, the true artists are really concerned about preserving their, their ownership and not being deep faked and not having their stuff copied without, due license, without due compensation and all that, right? And that they need to be protected in this, right? And laws and the specific regulations, they all need to be updated to better protect the artists. The other side of this, though, is the fact that, you're always going to get the noise no matter what, right? And these AI tools just allow for more noise when we're hoping for less. So in the end, we're just going to end up, we have to discern. We have to be the consumer who makes the decisions about what we feel is right. And, if we feel we want to support, a human artist, that's what we do. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point you make, actually. But also that you could still have a human artist that's utilizing AI to create things, right?
Yeah.
Then it becomes a tool. So there's a difference between saying, well, AI is just creating this as opposed to AI being used as a tool. And in fact, like we've talked about, I used it as a tool to create the intro for this podcast. I use it for research. Even when the episode's recorded, I use AI to help get summaries out and to write those. I use AI to generate the artwork. And, to what degree of originality is coming out of the artwork and so on, we can argue about, but what we can't argue about is that I've been able to use it as a tool to really put together this podcast in a way that, sure, I could have done it otherwise, right? I could have hired somebody to do the artwork. I could have sat and listened to the podcast and transcribed it. And, but what it did was it saved me a whole lot of time and effort. And I was able to do this without a huge disruption in my life. And if right now we haven't monetized this podcast, and if this podcast was my income, then maybe I would spend time doing all those things. But given the parameters of what we're trying to do here, I thought it's been an interesting journey of being able to use AI to express some level of creativity from myself and for you, right? And this vision we had for the podcast. So I think just to kind of juxtapose that a little bit, I do think there's opportunities in the creative field from AI as well.
Yeah. And the idea, of course, is I think there's going to be some very interesting new art being generated by these augmented artists in the future. So, that's kind of interesting. That's kind of exciting.
No, uncharted territory, but yeah. So, well, there you go. That's 11 episodes. We just went through it. Took a little while to get through them all. I think it was a good exercise to kind of go back through and figure out what we kind of learned. And for those that don't want to spend the however many was it, we had at least an hour per episode, sometimes more. So there's a good 14 or 15 hours probably of podcasts that people might want to listen to, might not want to listen to. But if they want to tune into this and get that summary. But it's been an interesting ride, my friend, and extremely, like I said, useful. I've certainly learned a lot. I think we've had some really great conversation, really great laughs. We've had some people tuning in, some people making comments. We're just two new people to podcasting, but we've had a certain degree of interest, but I think we've gotten a lot out of it ourselves, which I think has been fantastic.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think in the end here, we'll take what we've learned out of this first season and we'll apply it to our next one, and we'll see where it goes. We'll probably won't be focusing primarily on AI next season. We'll probably be focusing on other specific areas as well. But there's lots of
AI will infiltrate those topics, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
Where it's infiltrating everything. But I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff I I think we can definitely get into a lot of broader type areas, like we mentioned earlier, some things like nanotechnology, and we talked a little bit about neural interfaces, right? Brain computer interfaces, and we can get into autonomous vehicles and a lot of different areas, right? Where we can get a lot more generalized about technology. But I think that it's been super fun and interesting to dive into the AI world and really dissect it and understand it. And I've certainly come away with a much better foundational understanding of AI and its impact to our world and our industry for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And in the end, when we move into the future here, we'll be able to say, this is our first cut. We're going to be able to take what we've learned here and build on it.
It'll be like a time capsule, right?
Yeah.
Somewhere in the future, somebody will dig up this podcast and listen to us two old guys pontificate on AI and its impact on society and in kind of a snapshot, right? Because we're not experts necessarily in AI. We've done a lot of learning over the last few years and that type of thing. But what we've really tried to do with this podcast is just kind of give our perspective on it based on decades of, like we talked about at the beginning, being involved in technology and watching technology grow over the years, right? From back to the times of VHS tapes all the way through to like streaming Netflix on your phone. We've seen that, evolution of technology. So I do think we have a bit of a different perspective on things than the average person, where we can kind of give our take on things. And I think that's been the really cool part of it, is to really bring together our brains and kind of give a good commentary on things, right? And hopefully some people learn some things along the way.
Thank you for listening to the Probability Podcast. Please join us next time for more musings from the generator and the discriminator.